It was a warm summer night in the quiet town of Hemsley, where nothing much ever happened. People left their doors unlocked, and most folks knew each other by name. Sheriff Dean Holloway had worked in the town for over 20 years, and everyone respected him. He always wore his white hat, clean button-up shirts, and a red tie. He had a calm voice, a strong presence, and he never once missed a shift. His deputy, Carla Mendez, was younger, sharp-minded, and just as brave. The two of them made a great team. On the night of July 9th, 2009, Sheriff Holloway and Deputy Mendez left the station around 9:30 p.m. to check on a strange report from a farm near the edge of town. A caller said they heard screaming and seen strange lights near the woods. Normally, it would be something simple like a prank or someone setting off fireworks. Still, they took every call seriously. They drove off in their patrol car, flashing lights off, radioed in that they were heading to investigate, and promised to check back in within the hour. But that call never came. By morning, no one had heard from either of them. Their radio was silent all night. When dispatch tried to contact them around 11 p.m. and got no answer, a second unit was sent out. They found nothing. The farm they were supposed to visit looked peaceful and untouched. The cows were quiet. The barn was locked, and there were no tracks except those from the patrol car, leading in and then back out toward a long dirt road that ran along the woods. But the car was gone too. For 3 whole days, every officer, local volunteer, and even search dogs combed the woods, fields, and nearby creeks. They searched from sunup to sundown. Helicopters circled above. Flyers were taped to every pole in town. People feared the worst. Everyone asked the same question: how could 2 trained officers just vanish? Weeks passed with no sign, then months. Rumors started to spread. Some said they ran off together, but that didn't make sense. Sheriff Holloway had a wife and kids, and Deputy Mendez had just gotten engaged. Others whispered about strange things in the woods, old ghost stories, and things people usually laughed off. Some folks even mentioned the outhouses left from the 1800s in the hills, old with structures barely standing, once used by travelers and homesteaders. But those stories were brushed aside by the police. After a year, the case went cold. It was like they had vanished into thin air. Over the years, the town moved on. A new sheriff took over. Holloway's family eventually moved away, tired of the constant whispers. Mendez's fiancée never married. Her parents kept a small photo of her on their fireplace, waiting, hoping. The patrol car was never found. Not a radio, not a flashlight, not even a shoe. Every anniversary, the local paper would print a small reminder of the night shift that ended without a goodbye. Gone but not forgotten, it always said. 16 years passed, and the case sat at the bottom of a dusty filing cabinet, locked and forgotten. That is, until one dry spring morning, when an old man named Jedediah Turner was clearing out the overgrown back lot of his late uncle's property on the edge of town. He came across a leaning, gray wooden outhouse nearly hidden by bushes and vines. It was falling apart, the door barely hanging on. It had no roof, and the hole was covered by a loose board. Jed decided to knock it down for safety. But when he opened the door, something strange caught his eye. Lying on the wooden floor, half buried in dirt and spiderwebs, was a rusted police badge. Next to it, a cracked radio and a faded red tie. His heart skipped a beat. The badge read, Sheriff D. Holloway. Jedediah stared at the badge for a long moment, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. He picked it up with trembling hands, brushing off the dirt. The name was clear, though the metal was corroded and worn by time. He looked around, expecting someone to jump out, like it was all some kind of prank. But the place was still and silent, only the sound of birds and wind moving through the trees. The radio beside the badge was cracked, its antenna broken. The red tie was rolled up, almost like someone had tucked it there on purpose. Jed had lived in Hemsley his whole life. He remembered when Sheriff Holloway and Deputy Mendez vanished. He remembered the candlelight vigils, the posters on windows, the funeral with no caskets. The sheriff had been like a hero to the town. And now, here was his badge, after 16 years, inside a crumbling outhouse on the edge of a forgotten property. Jed didn't waste time. He called the sheriff's office immediately. Within an hour, several squad cars, a forensic team, and even a local news van had arrived. They roped off the area with yellow tape and began digging carefully beneath the old boards of the outhouse. They found more. Below the floorboards, under a layer of dirt and stone, was a small opening, a hidden crawl space barely large enough for a person to fit through. It looked man-made, like someone had dug it intentionally. Flashlights revealed scraps of fabric, bones, and something that made everyone go quiet. A second badge, this one belonging to Deputy Mendez. The air grew heavier as investigators realized what they had stumbled upon. The remains were confirmed to be human. 2 skeletons, huddled close together in the cramped hole beneath the outhouse. The medical examiner later confirmed it through dental records. Sheriff Holloway and Deputy Mendez had finally been found, buried less than 5 miles from where they had disappeared. The entire town was stunned. For years, people had thought they'd been taken far away, maybe across the country. But all this time, they were right there under a pile of wood and weeds, just waiting to be discovered. News spread quickly. Reporters from across the state came to Hemsley. The story made headlines. Missing lawmen found after 16 years in forgotten outhouse. But as relief washed over the town, new questions began to rise. How did they end up there? Who put them in that hole? Why hadn't the land been searched back when they vanished? Sheriff Lane, the man who took over after Holloway disappeared, held a press conference and promised answers. He reopened the case and brought in a new team of detectives from the State Bureau. They reviewed all the old files, every report, every witness statement. They interviewed the farmer who had made the original 911 call back in 2009, only to learn he had died 5 years ago. But his son, who now owned the land, remembered something odd. He said his father always believed he hadn't made that call. He swore someone used his name and faked the report to draw the sheriff and deputy out that night. That detail missed or ignored back then now seemed critical. Meanwhile, evidence from the outhouse site gave more clues. One of the skeletons had a fractured wrist, likely from a struggle. The crawl space had claw marks along the wood, signs that someone tried to escape or at least call for help. The coroner found fibers under the fingernails of one victim, likely from whoever sealed them in. Most chilling of all, near the remains was a worn leather notebook. Inside were pages torn and faded, but on one page, written in shaking handwriting, was a message. He locked us in. He knew we were coming. Tell my family I tried. No name was signed, but it was clear the note came from either the sheriff or the deputy. This wasn't an accident. It was a trap. Someone had lured them there that night and made sure they never came out. The whole town now realized that what seemed like a mystery of bad luck or disappearance was, in truth, a terrible crime, and whoever did it had been living free for 16 years. The investigators kept digging, not just in the dirt, but into the town's past. Sheriff Lane called in retired officers who had worked with Holloway and Mendez, asking them to recall anything strange in the time before the disappearance. Slowly, old memories began to resurface. One officer remembered a series of break-ins that happened right before Holloway vanished. They had all stopped a week after. Another deputy mentioned that Holloway had seemed tense in the days leading up to his last shift, more serious than usual, like something was bothering him, though he never said what. Lane also re-examined the town maps from 2009. It turned out the property where the bodies were found had been missed during the original search because of a clerical error. It had been marked as abandoned and condemned, and no one had thought to check it. The land once belonged to a man named Orville Tucker, a strange loner who had lived in Hemsley most of his life. He owned several odd buildings, including the outhouse and a decaying barn nearby. People in town used to say Orville was off, always watching from his porch, never smiling. But no one ever suspected him of anything serious. He died in 2013 alone, and the land passed to his nephew Jedediah, the same man who found the sheriff's badge. Detectives looked into Orville's background and found something that chilled them. In the 1970s, he had been arrested for kidnapping a woman from a nearby county. He had tied her up in a shed and claimed she was evil and needed to be kept away from the world. He served only a few years in a psychiatric hospital and then returned to Hemsley. The case had been forgotten by most, But now it looked like it mattered. A deeper search into Orville's property revealed a disturbing truth. Beneath the floor of the barn, they found chains attached to the walls, an old chair with leather straps, and personal items belonging to people no one could identify. It became clear that Orville had been hiding something terrible for decades. Sheriff Holloway and Deputy Mendez may have discovered this the night they vanished. Maybe they had found something they weren't supposed to. A neighbor living across the field from the property came forward with something even more shocking. She said she remembered seeing the patrol car that night parked near the old barn. She also saw another man standing outside with a flashlight. She assumed it was just a regular check, but what she described, the figure, tall, wearing dark overalls and a wide hat, matched Orville Tucker's appearance exactly. This changed everything. The note found with the bodies made more sense now. Holloway and Mendez had been lured by a fake call. When they arrived, Orville was waiting. He likely forced them at gunpoint into the outhouse, then sealed the space beneath it and left them to die. The notebook was their only way to speak after death. It was clear now that Orville had planned it. He knew the area, knew how to hide people, and was skilled at making them vanish. But why them? What did they find that night that cost them their lives? Detectives kept searching, hoping to find more evidence in the barn or on the old property. Deep in a chest in the attic, they found a series of cassette tapes. Each one was labeled with dates and names. Some tapes were too damaged to play, but others revealed hours of disturbing recordings. Orville speaking to himself, ranting about cleansing evil, about how the sheriff and his deputy knew too much. One tape, dated July 9, 2009, the exact night of the disappearance, had faint background sound of arguing, the sheriff's voice demanding Orville open the door, then gunshots, followed by silence. It was the missing piece. There was no longer any doubt. Orville Tucker had murdered the sheriff and his deputy, then buried the truth under wood and dust, and somehow no one had looked deep enough until now. The town reacted with sorrow and anger. People gathered for a memorial at the newly rebuilt courthouse. Holloway's children, now grown, returned for the ceremony. Mendez's parents lit candles and hugged every person who came. But the pain was still strong. Hemsley had lost two of its best, and the truth that followed was almost worse than the mystery. The fact that the killer had lived among them, unnoticed and free, left many speechless. Still, for the first time in 16 years, there were answers, but something still felt incomplete. Sheriff Lane believed there was one more piece of the puzzle that hadn't yet surfaced, something hidden deeper on the property, or maybe still waiting to be uncovered. Days after the tapes were found, investigators continued combing through the rest of Orville Tucker's property, especially the wooded area behind the barn. The soil there was disturbed in strange patterns, as if someone had dug and filled holes repeatedly over the years. A team of cadaver dogs was brought in to search for any other possible victims. What they uncovered stunned everyone. Not far from the outhouse, beneath an old pile of rotted lumber and rusted tools, they found another small burial site. Inside were two suitcases filled with clothing, photographs, and more cassette tapes, along with the remains of a third person, one never previously reported missing in Hemsley. Dental records later confirmed the identity, a traveling salesman from Texas who had vanished in 2001. It was now confirmed that Orville Tucker was a serial killer, and Hemsley had been his secret hunting ground for decades. The sheriff and deputy had likely uncovered this during their investigation that night in 2009. They probably stumbled onto evidence, or even witnessed something that triggered Tucker into silencing them forever. The last tape, discovered among the items in the suitcase, was different from the others. It was labeled Final Warning in red marker and contained Orville's voice recorded in a shaking, almost nervous tone. On it, he confessed, not out of guilt, but fear. He spoke of others, shadowy figures he claimed were coming for him, voices in the woods that kept him awake at night. He said Holloway and Mendez were only the beginning and warned that the rot in this town runs deeper than people know. Investigators dismissed much of the tape as ramblings of disturbed man, but some parts were harder to ignore, especially a part where Orville mentioned a second person who helped him dig the space beneath the outhouse. The name he whispered was Marvin Keller. When police searched the town records, they found that Marvin had been a handyman who often worked for Orville in the early 2000s. He had a record of petty theft and animal cruelty, but had never been arrested for anything serious. Oddly, Marvin had disappeared in 2010, just 1 year after the sheriff and deputy vanished. Detectives found a connection. Marvin had lived in a trailer just a few miles from Orville's property, but it had long since been abandoned. When they searched the trailer, they found evidence he may have lived there for some time after Orville's death. Clothes, food cans, and most importantly, maps. One map had the Outhouse property circled in red, with the word truth written beside it. Another pointed to a nearby pond on the edge of town. Divers were sent in to explore it, and there they found the missing patrol car, rusted, sunk to the bottom, with 2 bullet holes in the windshield and the sheriff's hat floating inside. This was the final confirmation that Holloway and Mendez had been attacked, not just trapped. It wasn't an accident. It was an ambush. The town could barely believe what had been uncovered in such a short time after 16 years of silence. The families of both officers were offered full honors and formal apologies from the state. A new memorial was built in the town square with 2 stone statues, one for Sheriff Dean Holloway and one for Deputy Carla Mendez. At the base, an engraved message read, "They never stopped protecting us." The community came together like never before. The pain was still there, but so was pride. People brought flowers, candles, letters, and even children's drawings. Everyone wanted to thank the 2 officers who had paid the ultimate price trying to bring justice to a town that hadn't known the danger living in its shadows. But the case, though mostly closed, left behind lingering questions. If Marvin Keller helped Orville, where did he go? Did he die? Or was he still out there? Was Orville acting alone, or were there more people involved? Sheriff Lane ordered the case to remain open, but labeled as solved with caution. A small group of detectives were assigned to continue tracking down leads quietly. In truth, most believed Marvin was long dead or had fled far away. Still, others feared he was hiding in plain sight, perhaps even still in town under a new name. The story of the vanished sheriff and deputy would forever be told in Hemsley, not as a mystery anymore, but as a hard-earned truth uncovered one broken board and faded badge at a time. All thanks to an old forgotten outhouse that finally gave up its terrible secret.